In 2005, an 8-year-old girl, Shasta Groen, was getting ready for bed when she spotted something move inside her closet. Scared, she told her brother, but they both laughed it off as her imagination. He climbed into bed with her, and they eventually fell asleep. But in the middle of the night, Shasta's mother woke her up in a panic and dragged her into the living room. Her stepdad and older brother were zip-tied face down on the floor. Then, a man stepped out of the shadows holding a shotgun, and in that moment, it hit her. The movement in the closet wasn't her imagination after all. He forced their mom to the ground, tied up Shasta and her brother, and carried them outside. Then he went back inside and murdered the rest of the family. The man held the 2 children captive in the woods for weeks, assaulting them over and over. Eventually, he killed Shasta's brother too. But then came a twist. The man brought Shasta to a Denny's, thinking no one would notice. But a sharp-eyed waitress recognized her from the news and quietly called police. Joseph Duncan was arrested on the spot. He was sentenced to death for the murders and abuse, but died in prison from brain cancer in 2021.
She met up with a guy she met on Roblox, but she would never be heard from again. 17-year-old Haley Busby was from Indiana, and she was a junior in high school. Friends and family described her as bright, bubbly, and vibrant. On January 5th of 2026, Haley left her home early in the morning because she had plans to meet up with a guy that she had met online. This guy that Haley was talking to was 39 years old, and they had met on Roblox. As soon as Haley's parents realized that she was gone, they reported her as missing to police, and she was labeled as a runaway, but then it was quickly changed to endangered missing juvenile. Police had discovered that sometime in the early morning, a car was outside of her home, and it was traced back to a man named Tyler Thomas, and this is when Haley had left her home. When police spoke to Tyler, he stated that he did meet up with Haley, but then he dropped her off on the side of the road in Ohio. His vehicle and his short-term rental property were searched, and that's when investigators came in contact with inappropriate photos and videos of Haley on Tyler's phone. Police started to swarm Tyler's home, and they went door to door asking neighbors if they had security footage because they believed that Tyler had something to do with Haley's disappearance. On February 1st, Tyler ended up taking investigators to a dismembered body in Ohio that belonged to Haley. Tyler was arrested, and he is currently being held on a $1.5 million bond.
While we're on the subject, Jeffrey Epstein's island was not the first of its kind. There was a man named Frank Sheldon that owned a private island and trafficked young boys to the most powerful men at the time, all under the guise of a boys' nature camp. And if you remember my previous videos on this topic, you'll know that some of the men involved would go on to very suspiciously end their own lives. Sound like anybody else we know? North Fox Island's disturbing activities all unraveled in the 70s, and there were rumors that even JonBenet Ramsey's family had ties to the island, as well as serial killer John Wayne Gacy. But here's where what happened on North Fox Island ties into what's happening in our world today. And if you're like, wait a minute, I haven't even heard all of the info you just mentioned, then just click on my playlist below and watch my previous videos on this topic. At the time that North Fox Island was exposed for its disturbing history, Jeffrey Epstein would have been about 23 years old, and he was a previous student camper at Interlochen Center for Arts in Michigan. Then, as he got older, he became a donor to Interlochen to help support their operations, much like the system that was set up on North Fox Island, where wealthy men would donate money to gain access to victims. And then, when Epstein's island was exposed, it was revealed by the DOJ that he used Interlochen as a hunting ground for victims that he would later abuse and traffic on his island. And that's not it, because we then learned the story about Jeffrey's yacht on Lake Michigan, where he, along with some other very powerful people, toss a 13-year-old victim's newborn baby into open water. Now, does this prove that Jeffrey Epstein is connected to North Fox Island? Well, not necessarily, but what he would go on to do is extremely similar. And given the circumstances that he was involved with surrounding areas in Michigan, I don't think it's that much of a reach.
This is a scan of the boiler room, and if you look at it, you can notice that there was a steam valve left open while the ship was going down, meaning somebody was still working down there even when the ship went under. And before this picture, nobody thought that was the case. And this picture means that the generators were likely still running, so the lights were on much longer than people originally thought. So while many of the crew members were trapped, others stayed behind deliberately trying to keep the power on to help the people on the ship escape. You know, people were upstairs trying to navigate the decks, and they needed light so they could safely get to their lifeboats. I also thought this picture was insane. I never think about out the Titanic on the ocean floor like this, like we only see the top of the ship. They also hoped that if the ship stayed illuminated longer, it would be visible to the ships nearby, like the Californian or the Carpathia, and it would be easier to signal for help. On top of this, them having power meant that they were able to send distress signals for longer. So these brave men that worked in the boiler room stayed alive longer, knowing they were not going to survive, to try to help others at least be seen or survive, and they are the true heroes of the Titanic. Follow for more.
One policeman said he had never seen a case as horrific as this one in his entire career. When 16-year-old Kellyanne Bates told her mum about her boyfriend, she was shocked. Margaret lived with her daughter in Hattersley, England, and they lived a fairly ordinary life. However, Margaret was shocked to learn that her teenage daughter's boyfriend was in his mid-40s. Other than being unhappy about the obvious age gap, Margaret found her daughter's boyfriend, James Smith, deeply disturbing. Now, the pair had apparently met when Kelly was only 14 years old. They had been keeping their relationship secret until now. Soon after this, Kelly moved in with unemployed James. It seemed that as time went on, she became more quiet and reserved. On the odd occasion that her parents did see her, they noticed marks on her arms. Margaret tried to report this to police, but all police did was give her some leaflets to give to Kelly to try and encourage her to leave. Little did they know James had a dark past. He had actually been married before and had got divorced over allegations against him of DV. Other exes shared similar stories of abuse. It's believed that he once even tried to drown a 15-year-old girlfriend. James was unfortunately no different to Kelly. He would regularly abuse her, and the teenager suffered in silence. In April 1996, his violence reached a whole new level. On the 16th of April, he walked into a police station to announce that he had accidentally killed Kelly. He stated they'd had an argument while she was in the bath and she'd accidentally drowned. However, when police arrived at the pair's home, they found a horrendous scene. Police discovered Kelly's body and the house was smeared with her blood. The pathologist found over 150 injuries on her body, and these were determined to have taken place over a period of a month. The true horror of what Kelly went through is unimaginable. She had been tortured for weeks up to her death. James had starved her and tied her to a radiator by her hair. She'd been burned with an iron, strangled and stabbed. She had been scalped and her eyeballs were gouged out at least 5 days prior to him drowning her in the bath. Shockingly, there are even more horrific injuries if you would wish to Google these. At his trial, other abuse victims of James testified against him. James, however, argued that he was the real victim. He said, "She put me through hell, winding me up." In 1997, he was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison, and he remains there to this day.
Two of the siblings in this photo stabbed their entire family with plans to kill hundreds more. Michael and Robert Bever were the oldest brothers in what appeared to be a happy homeschooled family. Their 13-year-old sister tried to warn their parents that they were collecting knives and body armor, but they brushed it off as boys being boys. We now know that on July 22nd, 2,000 rounds of ammunition were on the way to the family's home in Broken Arrow. The 16 and 18-year-olds were sick of their life, and they had a plan. They'd quickly kill their family, hide their dismembered bodies in the attic, and then go on a killing spree through Washington state. Around 11:30 that night, April Bever told her two teens that they needed to head downstairs to do the dishes. Their sister Krista walked in to remind them and strangely found that their knives were laid out on their bed. Michael then asked Robert if they should do it right now, and he replied yes. With that, Krista was asked to go look at something on their computer, and as soon as she did, Robert came up from behind and slit her throat. He found that it, quote, wasn't like on TV where you cut them once and they die. From here, the boys presumably killed their parents and then set off to search for where their 4 youngest siblings were hiding. They first found 5-year-old Victoria and 7-year-old Christopher locked in a bathroom, and horrifically, Michael knocked on the door and pretended he was about to be killed. As soon as his siblings opened the door to save him, he stabbed them 20+ times. Now, around the same time, a 911 call came in from 12-year-old Robert, who was still hiding in the bathroom. To kill him, the boys did the same horrible thing. Michael pretended he was being attacked, and when Daniel opened the door for him, he too was stabbed to death. As we know, the boys then planned to decapitate their 2-year-old sister, but before they could, police were knocking at the door. As canines surrounded them, Michael reportedly told his brother, quote, "It was a pleasure doing business with you." During police interrogations, it would become clear the boys wanted to be more famous than Columbine and did intend to go on that killing spree. The ammunition arrived at their house the following day, but thankfully it was never used. In the end, both Michael and Robert were sentenced to life, despite allegations of abuse in their family. Crystal actually survived the attack along with her 2-year-old sister, and they've been adopted by the same family. Hopefully they are healthy, happy, and healing in their new life.
These teenagers were killed in their sleep by the last person anyone would expect. It was the 1st of November 2018 in Oklahoma. Kaysen Tolliver was 18 years old. His sister was 16-year-old Chloe. They also had a younger 14-year-old sister who remains anonymous. Kaysen was a talented football player and was a senior in high school. Chloe was described as a sweet, kind girl who loved cheerleading. Their mum was 43-year-old Amy Hall. In the early hours of the morning on the day in question, she crept into her son's bedroom and shot him in the head. He was instantly killed. Now, his friend was sleeping over in the same room and started to call police. Amy then walked into Chloe's room that she shared with her younger sister and shot them both. The younger sister was grazed in the neck but managed to flee to the bathroom. It was there that she convinced her mum to hand over the gun. Police sped round to the scene at around 6:30 a.m. that morning and rushed Chloe to hospital. Tragically, she was declared brain dead and passed away 4 days after. Meanwhile, Amy had fled the house and was involved in a high-speed car chase with police. She was eventually apprehended and taken into custody. Amy later claimed that she killed her children in order to save them from her estranged husband. There was allegedly an ongoing custody battle. She has pleaded guilty and been sentenced to life in prison.
Let's talk about celebrities who are either not very good people or have done some pretty bad things, some of which you might not even know about. Mark Wahlberg is a very famous actor. You might know him from movies such as Ted, Transformers, Planet of the Apes, to name a few. Before becoming famous in the 90s, Mark Wahlberg was involved in several violent, racially motivated attacks that landed him with criminal charges. One included attempted murder and a short prison sentence. There was a harassment case against him in 1986 where him and his friends chased a group of black children while calling them racial slurs and throwing rocks at them. This resulted in a civil rights injunction. Less than 2 years later, he then attacked 2 Vietnamese men, again shouting racial slurs at them whilst trying to steal alcohol. He knocked one man unconscious with a wooden stick and later punched a second man in the eye. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison but only ended up serving 45 days, and he was also then convicted of contempt of court for violating a prior civil rights injunction. And in 1992, just a few years before he rose to fame, he broke his neighbour's jaw by kicking him in the face and had to settle out of court. Great guy. Jack Nicholson is another actor who I feel like not a lot of people know the lore behind Jack Nicholson. He was a pretty well-known Casanova in his day and is rumoured to have slept with over 2,000 women. He has children with several women, I think 6 children with 5 women, and one of them he even kept a secret and has no relationship with. But what's worse about Jack Nicholson is that in 1996, he assaulted a woman so violently that he ruptured her breast implants. Then later that same year, he hired 2 prostitutes, and when the deed was done and the ladies asked for their money, he then assaulted them, one of which her injuries were so bad that she had brain damage. They settled out of court. I might make this a series because there are a lot of people to go through. So if this interests you, drop me a follow, and maybe next time I'll talk about Paul Walker and Morgan Freeman.
This murder case will put you off ever going on spring break. Brittany Drexel was born in Rochester, New York in 1991. In April 2009, she asked her mum if she could go to a beach in South Carolina with friends for spring break. Her mum said no, as she just had a bad feeling about it. The pair argued for days about this, and eventually Brittany asked if she could just go to a friend's house for a few days, and her mum agreed. Brittany actually went to South Carolina for the trip her mum had refused to let her go on. 3 days later, Brittany and the group that she was travelling with got to Bar Harbor Hotel in Myrtle Beach. Brittany called her mum to say that she was at the beach, but her mum assumed that she meant a local one. That night around 8, Brittany left her friends at the hotel to go and meet a good friend who was staying at another hotel. The walk was only around 1.5 miles. Security cameras at the Blue Water Resort showed her arriving. CCTV then captured her leaving around 45 minutes later. Brittany was texting her boyfriend John. They'd been texting back and forth, but around 9:15 her text suddenly stopped. John called her friends to see if they had heard from her or knew where she was. No one answered, so he called her mum. Now, this was the first time her mum realised that she'd actually gone to South Carolina with her friends. She phoned police and calls and texts to Brittany's phone went unanswered. Police began the hunt for Brittany. In her hotel room, only her purse and her phone were missing. No sign of her was found in the extensive search of the area. Frustratingly, the case would go cold for 7 years. That was until June 2016 when a prison inmate made a shocking confession. Taquan Brown claimed to have witnessed Brittany being SA'd by a gang on April 27, 2009. He claimed that he then heard her being killed by gunshots. However, police were still unable to find Brittany, and they were unable to corroborate the whole story. Police found that registered S offender Raymond Moody, 62, was staying at a motel in Georgetown in South Carolina around the same time that Brittany disappeared. On the day she vanished, Raymond was actually pulled over for a traffic violation near Myrtle Beach. A police officer had noted that he had scratches all over his face. Upon questioning, Raymond actually confessed to killing Brittany. He also provided the location of her remains. She had to be identified through DNA and dental records. It's believed that the young girl was strangled and buried by the morning of April the 26th. Raymond was sentenced to life in prison.
15 years after her son was kidnapped, he would turn up to his mother's door, warning her not to go to the police or his life would be in danger before speeding off, never to be seen again. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the disappearance/kidnapping of Johnny Gosch. John David Gosch was born in 1969 and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. Known to everyone as just Johnny, he was described as a kind, friendly, fun, upbeat, energetic young boy who was determined and very hard-working. He picked up his first job as a paperboy when he was only 11 years old, and he had picked up this job because he wanted to save up his money to buy himself a new dirt bike, along with having enough money to buy some supplies for his model rockets that he was building. Either his dad, who was also named John, or his mum, who was named Maureen, would accompany Johnny as he did his paper route, pulling along a red wagon with a squeaky wheel around the streets in the early hours of every Sunday morning. On the evening of the 4th of September 1982, Johnny was trying to barter with his mum a little bit. He was telling her that he believed he was old enough to go and do the paper route by himself now. He had been doing it for around about a year. He was confident with his route, which he knew like the back of his hand. Noreen wasn't convinced though. She told Johnny that, no, you're not old enough to be going out by yourself yet, and the other paper boys who are going out by themselves, they're 15, they're 16 years old, so they are still a lot older than he is. He is 12 at this moment in time. However, the following morning, September 5th, Johnny woke up extra early and snuck out of the house, taking just the family dog with him to do his paper route. A neighbour would recall seeing Johnny pulling the red wagon at around about 5:55 a.m. Johnny and the other paper boys, who all had different routes, would all go to a nearby church to collect the papers that they were going to deliver, and on Johnny's way there would have a very off-putting interaction with a strange man. This man, who was described as being chunky and potentially having a mustache, who was slurring his words, was asking Johnny, shouting to him, wanting directions. He was shouting from his car, which was believed to be two-tone blue in colour and had an Iowa license plate. When he is shouting to Johnny asking for directions, Johnny is completely ignoring him, not interacting, and carrying on his walk to the church. What this man did though was he made a U-turn in the road, drove up to a corner that Johnny was just about to pass, and parked up on the side. He opened up the door, slid over to the passenger seat, and kind of put his feet on the pavement, so he still sat in the car but his legs and his feet are both out of the car, and as Johnny is walking past, he leans over to him again, asking for directions. And when Johnny ignores him again, this man goes on to ask other children, the other paper boys, the same question. Johnny told another older paper boy who was 16 that he felt a little bit scared and very uncomfortable by this man, so Johnny had collected his newspapers and decided that he was going to make his way back home, potentially to wake up his dad to come and do the round with him. When Johnny separated from the other paper boys going to make his way back home, this weird man got back into his car, flicked his internal light on and off 3 times, almost as if he was making a signal, and then drove off. A couple of hours later, Noreen would begin to get phone calls from the nearby residents who were asking where their newspapers were. Johnny was very punctual when it came to his newspaper round. He took this job very seriously. He actually only just won a Perfect Service Award, so for him to have not delivered the newspapers on time or not deliver them at all was very out of the ordinary. John, who again is Johnny's dad, decided to go out and walk the newspaper route to see if he could find his son and see what was going on. This is when, only 2 blocks away from the family home, he would find the red wagon still filled to the brim with newspapers alongside the family dog, but his son was nowhere to be seen. Immediately, Noreen contacted the police trying to report her son missing, but because of policy at the time, the police could not take the report until Johnny had been missing for 72 hours, even though he is incredibly young. He's only 12 years old, and even though these circumstances were unusual. When police did begin to speak to people regarding Johnny's disappearance, he would speak to neighbours and the other paper boys who all relayed on the weird interaction that he had with the man in the car. 2 other boys who were out and about that morning told the police that they had saw Johnny and they believed that he was being followed by 2 men. Another neighbour would recall hearing a car door slam, wheels screeching as they drove off, and when she looked out her window, she saw the red wagon filled with newspapers and the family dog, but no sign of Johnny. She would also say that it was a silver car that took off, not a 2-toned blue car like the weird man had been driving. Years would go by without any real progression on the case of the kidnapping / disappearance of Johnny Gosch. During this time, other children would go missing under very similar circumstances, however their cases were never formally linked. Over the next couple of years, there would be several sightings and signs of life from Johnny. A woman in March 1983 said that she was out and about walking in Oklahoma when a young boy being chased by 2 men ran up to her. This young boy asked the woman for help, telling her that his name was John David Gosch. She would go on to report this to the police, who essentially brushed it off. It wouldn't be until months later, when she was sat watching the news, that a segment on Johnny aired, and she recognised that boy immediately as the boy who ran up to her in Oklahoma. She contacted the tip line and relayed this event onto the person on the tip line, and the FBI, along with private investigators, agreed that that boy likely was Johnny. On another occasion, a woman is in a supermarket and she's checking the change that she's just getting from the cash register when she notices that one of the notes has some writing on it, and the writing said, quote, "I am alive, Johnny Gosch." 3 handwriting experts alongside Noreen and John all looked at this note and they all agreed that it was Johnny's handwriting. The most infamous and highly debated sighting of Johnny Gosch would occur in March 1997. By this point, he had been missing for 15 years. It was the middle of the night when Noreen would be awoken by the sound of people knocking on her door. She walked through her apartment and opened up the door, not believing what she was seeing. There was stood 2 men. One of the men she didn't recognise, and the other she immediately recognised as her son Johnny Gosch, who now would have been 27 years old. Allegedly, he solidified his identity by showing Noreen a birthmark that he had on his chest. Bear in mind that this birthmark was mentioned within the news outlets who were reporting on Johnny. If this was Johnny, he was nervous. Every time he spoke, he kind of looked to the man next to him, almost as if he was getting permission to speak, or if this man was watching him, making sure what he was saying. The 2 men stood with Noreen for around about an hour and a half. The man she didn't recognise did not say a word, whereas the man she believed to be her son spoke with her for the full 90 minutes. During this time, he gave no hint about where he was, what he was doing, what had happened to him, nothing like that. He eventually abruptly said that he had to go, and before he left, he warned Noreen to not contact the police. If she contacted the police, she could be putting his life in grave danger. So for a long time after this interaction, she never ever did, and that would be the last time that she ever saw who she believed to be her son ever again. There have been many theories surrounding what may have happened to Johnny. Many people, including his own father John, didn't believe that the man who showed up at Noreen's door was actually Johnny. Could it have been someone pulling a cruel prank on a devastated mother? This wouldn't be the first time that something like this happened to Noreen. At one point many years before, she had received some photographs on her doorstep, and the photos showed a young boy lay on a bed, bound and gagged, and this boy resembled Johnny.
It would later be confirmed that that wasn't Johnny, and these photos were just sent by some older kids who were just wanting to mess with Noreen. Really early in the investigation, she would be conned out of thousands of dollars after paying a fake ransom to someone who claimed to have her son, and she paid this fake ransom up to $100,000, I believe, in order to try and get him back. But again, this was just a con artist. He had nothing to do with Johnny or his disappearance. Noreen believes that her son Johnny Gosch was kidnapped and placed into a child S ring, where he is likely still at today.
Sometimes I forget that people don't know that Shirley Temple was a real person and not just the best drink ever created, but yeah, she was the greatest child star of all time and she had a really interesting life. Shirley Temple was born in Santa Monica, California in 1928. She was scouted when she was 3 years old to be an actress and a model, but even at that point, her mother had already been pushing her into show business. The real height of her career was ages 6 to 10. She's known for her singing and dancing abilities and for just kind of being generally the cutest child you've ever seen. This was at the height of the Great Depression, and her movies were specifically designed to be outlets for people to feel good and forget about their troubles for like an hour. Look up pretty much any clip of her dancing and it will blow your mind. There were rumors at the time that she was actually a little person because it was so unbelievable that a child could be that good. In addition to natural talent, the trick was she learned her lines phonetically, and she once said that she could tell if she was hitting her mark or not based on how the studio lights felt on her skin. She's the youngest person ever acknowledged by the Academy when she won the Juvenile Oscar in 1935 at age 6, which I'll talk about more in the video that this comment was made on. I feel like it's hard to explain just how famous she was. Like, in the 1920s, Shirley was the 17th most popular baby name at like 98,000 babies, and by the 1930s, that jumped to 4th most popular with 230,000 babies in the US. And she wasn't just popular with children, like, it was everyone. Like, this is a piece of art that Salvador Dali made, Shirley Temple, the youngest, most sacred monster of the cinema in her time. It's a satire of the sexualization of children in Hollywood, which she more than dealt with. It's unclear who actually invented the Shirley Temple drink, but the lore goes that it was created to serve to her because she obviously couldn't have alcohol at the height of her career, but she's on record as an adult saying that she never liked the drink because it was too sweet. Once her initial contract with 20th Century Fox was up, she was enrolled in a normal school for 7th grade, and then she kind of bopped around in movies through her teen years before announcing her retirement in 1950 at the age of 22. As an adult, she got into politics. By that point, she had 3 children and was going by her married name, Shirley Temple Black. She unsuccessfully ran for Congress in 1967, but was later made a delegate to the UN by Richard Nixon, the U.S. ambassador to Ghana by Gerald Ford, and the U.S. ambassador to Czechoslovakia by George H.W. Bush. She had beef with her former co-star Ronald Reagan because he didn't give her an official position. Not because she wasn't a Republican. Unfortunately, she was, but she supported his opponent in the 1980 election. She died in 2014 of COPD at 85 years old. When the American Film Institute made their list of the 25 greatest female screen legends of all time, she was number 18.
So I forgot that it's not common knowledge for most Americans that we stole Hawaii and the things that we did to Native Hawaiians. So I'm going to tell you, we're going to do a little recap today because we're going to put some motherfucking respect on Hawaii's name, okay? So I'm going to give you the best breakdown I feel like I can give you. This might be a little bit of a long video, but I promise I will make it interesting. So Hawaii used to be an independent kingdom. It was led by Queen Liliuokalani. I would argue that the issues with Hawaii started in like early 1800s because the Hawaiian population went from like 300,000 to 40,000 in the course of 100 years because the usual culprits, they came over, missionaries, settlers, and they stank asses over here with diseases that the Hawaiian population had no immunity to. So these foreign settlers didn't care though, because Hawaii's soil and climate was perfect for growing sugar, which was one of the most profitable crops in the world at the time. So these massive plantations get built. They're using labor from Native Hawaiians and Asian immigrants. And one of the most powerful plantation leaders was Sanford Dole, who was a businessman who helped overthrow Hawaii. And went on to become the president of the new U.S.-backed government that came after the overthrow and just before it became a state. And if you're wondering who Sanford Dole is, you know those little fruit cups that say Dole? Yeah, that guy. Throw them in the trash. So a group of Dole's little friends, businessmen, they forced the king of Hawaii, who was the queen's brother, to sign the Bayonet Constitution. They held him at gunpoint, and he signed this constitution, and it took away rights from the Hawaiian monarchy, voting rights from Native Hawaiians, and it essentially gave all this control to these wealthy plantation owners. So then when the queen realized what's going on, she's like, no, So she introduces a new constitution to restore this authority to the monarchy and return political power to Native Hawaiians. But the plantation elites saw this as a threat. They're like, so what are we going to do about this? Sanford Dole and his friends formed this group called the Committee of Safety, and they began organizing a plan to overthrow the Queen. So the U.S. military gets involved because they're like, oh, so there's money in this. 1893, U.S. Marines deployed to Honolulu. So these armed troops are positioned all around the palace, government buildings, and they back the overthrow of Hawaii. The Queen was essentially given an ultimatum of like, okay, give up Hawaii or thousands of Native Hawaiians are probably going to die. And so she wanted to protect her people from bloodshed. And she gave up her throne because at the time she said she trusted that the United States would investigate this. It must be a mistake, and they would restore the kingdom. But instead, the men that were behind the overthrow created their own government, which the U.S. supported. It was called the Republic of Hawaii, and the president was Sanford Dole. And so supporters of the Queen fought against this in like 1895, and the response from the new government was that they declared martial law, which is like total military control on the islands. Okay, you lose a lot of your normal rights. We saw dozens of her supporters get arrested. The Queen herself was kidnapped and imprisoned in her own palace, and they charged her with treason against the government that overthrew her government, which is insane. So then in 1897, like almost 40,000 Hawaiians signed this petition begging the United States not to annex their country, right? The Queen is writing letters to the White House. These petitions were so powerful that it stopped the annexation treaty in Congress, right? So we weren't able to annex Hawaii through a treaty at all. And that's important because under international law at the time, the only legitimate way for a country to annex another was through a treaty approved by both governments. So without a treaty, just taking land like that was illegal. And so instead, our little loophole that we did was we passed the Newlands resolution to claim the islands anyway. But the issue is that a resolution is just a domestic law. It only applies to the U.S. It doesn't have the power to legally annex another country under international law. So you can't just pass a law for yourself and claim someone else's land, which is why you hear Native Hawaiians and people with brains saying that the annexation of Hawaii was illegal, because at the time what was important to us was Asia, especially China and Japan, because our merchant ships were constantly crossing around the Pacific, because Hawaii sits almost perfectly between North America and Asia. So it was a crucial place for us to refuel our ships, for us to station our forces, the Navy. So controlling Hawaii meant protecting our trade routes, projecting our military power, preventing rivals from controlling that position, and Pearl Harbor. That's all I'm gonna say. So after the takeover of Hawaii, another thing that's important is that we tried to erase Hawaiian culture. So in 1896, Hawaiian was banned from being taught in schools. Hawaiian children were being punished for speaking Hawaiian. They were forced to speak English. And then we saw what was called the Hawaiian Renaissance, where they fought to bring back their language and culture. Really amazing. I don't have time to touch on it in this video, but you can go and look it up if you want to check that out. Then about a decade or two later, the United States, it was in 1993, Congress passed what was called the Apology Resolution, which was us admitting that U.S. agents helped overthrow the Hawaiian Kingdom, and that Native Hawaiians had never relinquished their sovereignty. So in other words, we wrote an apology admitting that the overthrow of Hawaii was legal. We were just like, okay, hey, sorry, we did that, but can't do anything about it now. So it starts to make you look at other U.S. territories differently, like Puerto Rico, where U.S. still controls the land, the government, but the people there have no voting rights, no real sovereignty. And so in moments of crisis, you see the same pattern. So the same way that the people of Hawaii felt ignored during the Maui fires is the same way that Puerto Rico was treated after those devastating hurricanes. It's control without care. And it's essentially history repeating itself. And I feel like it's important to call attention to this, because I come back when it happens, but I 100% believe that the United States government is trying to make Puerto Rico the next Hawaii.